Hi, so before we get started, let's just have a little talk about the things that I've got in front of me. So on my screen, I've got the Fauvism help sheet up, so I recommend that you have a look at that. I've got an image printed out in colour on an A4 sheet of paper. I've got a sheet of cartridge paper to work on, pencil, paintbrush, some watercolour paints, and I've got some wax crayons. Now, of the things that you see in front of me and in front of you, the only things that I definitely say you need are the Fauvism help sheet, some kind of paper to work on that's A4 size, and an A4 sized image to use as reference. So taking a closer look, I've got my pencil here that I'm going to use to do the sketch with. I've got my wax crayons, although if you've got oil pastels or any kind of similar material you can use those. I've got some watercolour paints, I've got my paintbrush, and I've got a water pot. Any water-based paint is fine to use in this activity, it's just that I've got these at home. I've got my image, which I've already spoken about, and I've got my paper, both of which are ready, so let's get going. Now, a couple of things to think about before we get started is that as much as this project is about animal portraiture, it's also about referring to the art movement of Fauvism. Now, with Fauvism, there's that lovely, vivid use of colour. It's abstract, it doesn't have to be realistic. You know, it's almost like the artist is looking through a filter that makes everything seem a lot more vibrant and energetic. The other thing is the way that we can see the marks that the artists are making on the artwork itself. Now, sometimes these marks are smaller, sometimes they're closer together, sometimes they're bigger, and sometimes they are further away from each other. But the point is that we can see what the artist is doing on the artwork itself. When printing your image, just make sure you think about the fact that it needs to fill that A4 sheet of paper to make the most of the room. Now, if it's portrait or if it's landscape, like I've just turned the paper, that's not a problem. Either way is fine. So what we're going to do now is just go through the stages of gridding up your paper. Now, gridding up is a skill that, if you learn as early as possible, is really going to help you out. Once learnt, it's a skill set that can be applied to virtually any project. So you start by folding your paper in half widthways. So be nice and accurate with this. We want nice crisp lines. Then you're going to do that again. So you've folded the paper in half widthwise. And then once you've done that twice, you're going to fold your paper in half lengthwise. The paper starts to thicken up here, so you need to be nice and firm, and then you do that one more time. Now, when you open up that sheet of paper, what you will see is that you've got a number of rectangles which have now been folded into the paper. So you should have 4 rows of 4, and you've got 16 rectangles, which you will then use in a moment as reference for how to draw your image nice and accurately. What I'm then going to do is take a ruler and a pencil, and I'm just going to draw those lines on. I'm just going to draw them on so that they're nice and clear, because otherwise sometimes they're a little tricky to see. Now, I'm doing exactly the same thing here. The process that I've just done, you need to repeat on your sheet of paper. So you fold your paper in half widthwise, then you're going to fold it in half again. Remember, you need to be nice and accurate with this. Then fold it in half lengthways. And then you're going to do that one more time. Now, once again, when you unfold your paper, you should see 16 nice rectangles, and then in a moment we'll go on to using that ruler and the pencil to draw those lines on. Now, you might not be happy with the fact that you've got creases on the paper you're going to be working on top of, but don't worry, as soon as you start to layer up materials, the creases will flatten out. Start this project as prepared as you can. So as you can see here, I'm going to sharpen my pencil just to get me going, and then we will look to add those lines onto your reference image and your paper so that they're nice and clear. So I'm going to use my ruler. I'm lining up the 2 lines either side. If they're hard to see, as you can see here, just bend the paper slightly and you can offer up the ruler against that fold, and then you'll know where to draw your line. You'll notice that for the purposes of the video, I have sped this process up. When you come to do it, I would recommend that you take your time with it. You still want to be as accurate as you can at this stage. With the grid drawn up on both the reference image and your paper, we can now see that the boxes are exactly the same size. So it's almost like doing a jigsaw puzzle here. Essentially, anything that you see in the box on the left, you're then going to draw on the box on the right. I'd take it box by box, and slowly but surely your outline will appear in the most accurate way. I've got my reference image here nice and close to my paper so that I can always keep an eye on it. The rule generally, I know that we talk about this quite a lot, is that you should be looking at your reference image 80% of the time, which is a huge number, but the more that you look at that image, the more it's going to help you to draw the most accurate drawing that you can draw. So as you can see here, nice and light, I'm not pushing hard at all on that pencil. It's just about building up that nice sketchy outline. And remember, the outcome of this piece of artwork is not a drawing. The drawing is just there to influence the painting, so it does not need to be an incredibly detailed drawing. It's just about capturing the features of your animal. And here's the finished sketch, and now the next step is to start building up some light washes of colour. With your water-based paints, it doesn't matter whether you're using acrylics or if you're using watercolours, the principle remains the same. You want a nice thin layer of paint to be applied. If you apply your paint too heavy, it's just going to be too overwhelming, and if you make any mistakes, they're going to be harder to get rid of. So I'm wetting my brush here nicely, and then I'm going to go for this nice green for a background. Think back to your Fauvism help sheet here. Use colours that you know a Fauvist artist would use. So I'm mixing that green up nicely, get a good surface coverage on my brush, and then I'm going to just, rather than go straight onto the paper, a bit of tissue, and I'm going to blot some of that paint off, and just to check what my consistency is. It's looking a little bit thick, so I'm just going to water that down slightly, and then I'm going to go straight in onto my background. Now, with any paper, no matter how thick it is, if you keep working that same area, it is going to start to buckle, it is going to start to damage the paper. So particularly if you're using thinner paper here, just be mindful that you don't focus all of your efforts onto the same bit of paper. Keep those brush strokes broad, you want a nice even coverage. I'm going to work my way around the background. You can see I'm not being too precious here, it doesn't matter if it overlaps slightly. And now you can see I've got a much richer colour because I've actually applied 2 layers to the background. Now, going back to my reference image, what I'm simply going to do, work from light to dark, and I'm going to build up that overall colouring on the tiger. I will stay true to the reference image, but I will also mix things up a bit because we must remember, as much as it's about portraiture, it's also about Fauvism and it's about those Fauvist colours. So what that means is that any areas that are black, maybe I might interpret as blue instead of black. The orange I think I'll keep the same, but I might add a bit more red in there, and we'll just see how we go. Now that I've added a good base layer onto the portrait, I'm going to look to move over to the wax crayons. Now, what's really important about the difference between the watercolour and the wax is that the watercolour, as I said, is just the base. It's not meant to be overwhelmingly rich or too detailed or too dark. That's where the wax crayon or whatever next material you have comes in. So when thinking about what to use, if you don't have these crayons, it's not a problem, but whatever you work on top with, make sure it's something that's going to be a bit more striking and is going to stand out against that background.